My name's Catherine Schneider, and I'm the Abstract Review Committee Chair for this year's Congress. And I'll be introducing our plenary speaker for this morning. Welcome to Day 2 of Congress 2014. Many of you early risers were up this morning supporting physiotherapy research at the PFC Race for Research. I also hope you were able to grab your coffee and attend some of this morning's eye-opener sessions. I am sure that you are feeling ready to jump into another day of the excellent programming we have to offer. There's a buzz in the air and lots of positive comments about the incredible educational programming so far, and I know that today's programming includes some significant highlights as well. Please make sure to fill out your evaluation for the sessions you attend. You can do so in paper format or by using our mobile app and clicking Submit Your Feedback. Now, I would like to introduce our morning plenary speaker. Alison Myers is an award-winning journalist with close to 15 years' experience. She spent much of her career working for CBC Radio, including 5 years as the national reporter for Alberta. In 2010, she received one of the highest honors in radio, the Grand Award, at the New York Festival's International Radio Competition for a documentary on a family's struggle with Huntington's disease. I first heard Alison speak at a retreat with the University of Calgary and the Alberta Children's Hospital Research Foundation. She is passionate about physiotherapy and healthcare and is a very engaging speaker. She does a fantastic job of bridging the gap between science and the general population, and I look forward to hearing her speak today and sharing with us her knowledge in this area.
Good morning, everybody. I hope everyone is having a great time at the conference. And for those of you who are not from Alberta, welcome to the lack of spring and lack of summer. I was in Ottawa a couple weeks ago and I was like, oh, it's so nice and warm and there are flowers and it's warm and beautiful. And here back in Calgary and Alberta, it's, well, we like to be chilly. So anyway, I am really excited to be here today to give you this talk. I'll tell you, first of all, go over a little bit about, so just briefly what we're going to talk about, using everyday language to explain what you do and why it's cool in a way without taking away its depth. So I think sometimes there's maybe a bit of fear of simplification, that people won't really understand what the strength of your science, of your research is, but I will give you some tools to make sure that that doesn't happen. So I'm going to go over, first of all, I'll give you an introduction of me. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll talk about what difference it's going to make to be able to speak about your science in a way, and your research in a way that's more engaging to the general public. To do this, we need to talk a little bit about media and their audiences and how reporters work and how audiences interpret or how they consume news. And then I will give you my 5 golden rules for writing, and this applies to all writing, not just research. So if you fancy yourself also a novelist, then you can take these into account. So first of all, me. I actually, when I was younger, I wanted to be a physiotherapist. So in high school, I started volunteering to get some experience in the field. When I was volunteering there, it was called the Hugh McMillan Center, and now I believe it's called the Holland Bloor View. That's a tough one to say. So I volunteered with a group of kids who have juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. We did an hour in the hot pool and then an hour with the physiotherapist and an hour doing some exercises with an occupational therapist. And even though I didn't end up in physio, it was honestly an amazing experience because the kids were so, despite their challenges in life, they were so resilient and their spirit was unbreakable, really, even though they were in a lot of pain. It was a great learning experience for all of life. So I actually applied at kinesiology at a bunch of different schools, and I ended up getting into biology in Dalhousie, aiming towards this physiotherapy career. But then I was hanging out with a bunch of journalists and talking to them about their stories, and one of them said, "You know, Alison, I think you missed your calling." And I said, I'm only 20, I couldn't have missed it already. So I thought, okay, well, I'll apply for journalism, and if I get into that, I'll do that, and otherwise, if I don't, I'll do physio, and of course, I got in. So here we are. But one of the things that interested me about physio was that I thought it would help me keep learning throughout my career, that I would get to meet lots of new people, and I would get to talk to them about their lives. I didn't just want to have these cursory sort of introductions to people and not really understand what was going on with them. I thought that it would give me a chance to travel and sort of take in the excitement of the world. I still did get to do that in journalism. I just did it in a way that didn't really help anybody regain movement in their arm or relieve tension in their neck or anything like that. So being here is actually a fun glimpse into the career that wasn't to be, and I'm sure you're all happy to know you represent my broken dreams. So why bother talking about your research to people outside of physiotherapy? Well, there are lots of reasons, which I'm sure are obvious to you guys, for grants, for getting your work into publications. Maybe you are looking for some community funding or media attention. These are all areas that you may run into people who are not familiar with the work that you do or with the language that you use to explain it. But there's also a social aspect to it. When someone asks you, community engagement, there we go, and fewer embarrassing social situations. So when someone asks you what you do, it's really nice to be able to explain it to them in a way that doesn't elicit that blank, confused stare. So it happens in every profession. I mean, people used to ask me, so I was a radio reporter, and people would ask me if that meant that I was on the radio. And the answer was yes, by the way. Sometimes, but if I wanted to, if I was at a dinner party or something like that, I could have said, well, if they say, what do you do every day? I would say, well, I go to Newsers, and then I come back and I cut a clip, and then I do a voicer, and then I do some FTR for the show. And, that's a lot of jargon. People would be like, what? So really what I do is I go out and I talk to people, and I come back and I write a story about them, and then I go into the studio to put it together into a piece of tape for the newscast. So there's a couple of different ways of explaining what you do. It still gets across the same point, but maybe in a little bit more approachable terms, I guess we could say. So the point isn't just to get people to get it. It's not just that you want them to understand what you do, but you want them to feel your passion, and your excitement. So, you want them to be able to say, wow, that is so cool. I didn't even know that people could research the relationship between how deep a stroke patient breathes and how fast they walk. Like, you want them to understand it, but to also feel it. So I have this, it's going to be kind of hard to read, I think, but this cheeky cartoon from Oikos Journal, which is an ecology journal from Sweden, I think, and it says, "Congratulations, you are now capable of writing technical, impersonal, and boring papers like myself and the other gentlemen and women, I should say. Welcome to academia." So we all know that you know how to write and speak research. It's what's gotten you where you are today. Clinical language is expected somewhat in when you publish papers, because you can assume a certain level of understanding on the part of your audience, right? This is more about getting people who have absolutely no background to understand what you do and why they should care. So this brings us to, why should I care? This sounds a little bit harsh, and when I say why should I care, I'm talking more about your audience. You study what you study because it means, means something to you. Stop touching myself. One of my favorite questions to ask during interviews, especially with researchers, is, and they never expect this one, what is it about you that made you want to study what you study? I have worked a lot, after my time with CBC, I went to work for the University of Calgary for a little while, and I was writing a lot of stuff about their medical research. And they can get down to the tiniest little things in your body. And it's, why are you studying how calcium gets across this little channel into this T cell? Like, how do you get there? And sometimes it takes a little bit of time to actually, for the researcher to get back into that spot, like, oh yeah, how did I get here? But it's often the most engaging part. So, and I know that there's somebody out here who is researching the effect of using yoga to help women with breast cancer manage their pain. Or there's also somebody investigating the ethical issues facing physical therapists who work with university sports teams. Like those are really cool things to investigate. So the idea is to find what it is about you that made you do what you're doing now. And that, even if that's not what you end up explaining to somebody, thinking about that before you explain it is really going to help you come across as engaging and passionate. Because what you do is not just professional, it is personal. So people have a lot of access to information these days, as I'm sure you're well aware. And with every informative interaction they have, they're asking themselves, does this really warrant the next nanosecond of my attention? So I'm not really sure, this change has come about, I guess, in the past, I don't know, decade maybe. And I'm not really sure whether we should blame social media or smartphones or the 24-hour news cycle, but people are so picky now about what they put in their brains. And if it isn't immediately captivating, they're going to move on. We are so skeptical now about the value and the worth of content that, oh, this really gets to me. The headlines, I don't know whether you see sometimes like on your Facebook feed or on blogs and things like this, the headlines, there's no information in the headline anymore. So now it would be more like, researchers give a stroke patient a Nintendo Wii. You'll never guess what happens next. So you're like, oh, what happens? I have to click and see. Instead of having the confidence in the headline and the information that you actually want to read it, people just want to know now and move on. So so it's also interesting to think about, what are some of the ways that you yourselves learn about the world? Because when we're talking about the news audience, that also includes yourself. So you can think about it, how am I consuming news? Where am I getting information? What do I find the most captivating? Some people use, oh, sorry, not that one. That's the pointer. I hope I'm not lasering anybody in the eye. Twitter. I'm not very good at tweeting, sorry. I find it's just too much information for me. And a lot of times, you'll see something that's interesting, but you don't really click through on the link, and if you do click through on the link, then you're not going to read the whole thing. There are also blogs. I'm talking about just non-mainstream media ways of finding information. There are news sites. Maybe you've got your favorite news site, CBC, woohoo, or Globe and Mail, or Calgary Herald, or wherever you're from. I'm sure you've got your own way to find news about your city. And of course, newspapers. Facebook now has a lot of suggested posts, which is actually kind of creepy. Good. It seems to know what you're thinking and what you find interesting. This is a little aside. So I was at my sister's house recently, and she has this Jamie Oliver cookbook about how to cook things in 15 minutes, which I don't believe, but he's like, you can cook it in 15 minutes if you have all of these things within like an arm's reach of yourself and you don't have a child trying to climb up your leg. So anyway, so I was texting with somebody about this, and then the next thing I know in my Facebook feed, there's something about Jamie Oliver. I'm like, really? That's just, it's so weird. Anyway, that's not what I'm talking about. So magazines and television. Does anybody even watch television news anymore? We still do television news, by the way. Every night. So anyway, this comes back to the fact that we have no attention span. This is true. Goldfish can keep their eyes on something longer than we can. Anyway, so people, the point is people are not going to waste their time reading an article that doesn't make sense to them or doesn't appeal to them. And the problem is they're going to make that choice in the first sentence, paragraph, maybe the first couple of paragraphs, but it's going to be pretty quick. And because you are among them. So this is the type of audience that media face every day. And this is why I think they're starting to call it infotainment. And it may not be exactly infotainment, but it's about reaching the public and engaging them and getting the audience and keeping them. So the problem is the demands on reporters are, and I'm not like playing the world's smallest violin here, but the demands on them are increasing. When I was in radio, but now there's no such thing as a radio reporter because you have to do radio, television, online, you have to be tweeting. Some of them write blogs, you have to send photos to the website. You have to do all of this. It's like you need 5 arms and 3 pieces of equipment, and you have to do it all while you're understanding what the story is, because at the top of the clock, which is, when the 0 zeros are there, you have to be on the air. So why does this matter to you? The reporters have to put in the work to understand, but they're really going to love it if you help them get there. One of the things that is really fun in media is, one of the things that we like to use anyway, are analogies. So I don't know how many times I had to say that the oil sands were the size of New Brunswick, or sometimes in medicine you can say that something is the width of a human hair. I don't know whether you guys have your own little catchphrase analogies, but that is what helps, that's one of those little tricks that helps people outside of the profession sort of put a picture in their mind. So New Brunswick is pretty big. There are a lot of people that fit in there. So to have the oil sands be the same size, okay, yeah, pretty big. I can see how thin a human hair is, so I can understand how small something is. You put it into language that, or put it into a picture or a time frame that somebody can understand. So this is why I urge you to keep it simple, scientist. And I was going to say researcher or physio, but then it would be like kisser, so I'm keeping it a scientist, just so work with me here. This may go against everything that you've practiced when it comes to writing about your work over the past, I don't know how many years, but there is a difference between writing grant applications and journal submissions and research papers for your professors or your peers and writing for the general public. So I have stolen a few examples from your program, and I'm probably going to not do a very good job of pronouncing some of these words. But you expect fellow academics to understand movement training and acromyohumeral distance in subject with rotator cuff tendinopathies, or something like that. Regular folks like me, it took me a really long time to come up with what I think it might mean, which is training people who've had rotator cuff injuries to have better arm movement. I don't know if I'm close, but you understand where I'm coming from here. So the technical language is really hard to interpret as quickly as people want to interpret their information. So this comes to rule number 1, speaking in plain English. This starts my basic rules about writing, and these apply to all informative writing. And when I say use plain English, I mean don't use a complicated word when a normal one will do. You could say that you utilize equipment, or you could say that you use equipment. You could say that you masticated your dinner, or you could say that you chewed it. So it's good to avoid also using jargon and abbreviations, like when I was talking about what I did as a reporter, things like FTR, voicers, clips, those are all like shop talk. It's not very useful. I don't even know how to, so that's an example. I don't know what that means. If people have to Google it, it's probably not a good idea to use it. I would have to Google that for sure. And if it appears in a textbook glossary terms, it's also probably not such a good idea. But I understand that sometimes you will have to use sciencey words. It's the truth. But you are going to need to use plain English to explain what they mean. And what I mean by that is you need to give your audience the tools they need to understand so that they don't just give up and move on. If I'm reading a medical journal article, which I honestly don't do very often, but if I'm doing that, because I still do some writing for the university, so sometimes I'm reading what the researchers have done, and oh my goodness, the acronyms and the words like this, sometimes it's just so hard to take in. But I mean, that's my job, so I spend the time to do it. But if I were just reading that for pleasure, I would just move on, because I would, I've got dinner to make and laundry to do and all this kind of stuff, right? So you need to give people what they need to understand why it should be engaging to them. Otherwise, they're just going to assume that it's not for their interest. So I took another couple of examples from your, sorry, I was just looking at the time, and that is going down. Okay. A couple of examples from your program. So one of them, and I'm just gonna show you what it says, and then I'm gonna try to sort of reword it in a way that might be a little bit more accessible to people outside of your profession. So this session and I'm not saying that these are hard to understand, I'm just saying that for the outside world, it could be a little bit more approachable. So this session was entitled Moving Evidence into Practice, Development and Utility of Regional Postoperative Shoulder Rehabilitation Guidelines. So it says this session will outline the process by which standardized consensus and evidence-derived post-operative shoulder guidelines were developed by a multidisciplinary team of orthopedic surgeons, physicians, and physical therapists. So it would be great if I could get you guys to do this, but I'm going to do it for you. So turning it into plain English, this is what I came up with. So people who come to this session will hear how a group of orthopedic surgeons, physicians, and physical therapists worked together to find better ways to help people recover from shoulder surgery. So some of the words I took out: process, standardized, consensus. These are all, while they are important in the program, they're not important for somebody at first glance to understand what has happened here. People have worked together to do something better. That's the key. So when I'm talking about, jargon and fancy words and things like that, I'm not saying that you can't eventually get into those sorts of details, but I'm talking if somebody asks you for more details, for example. But when at first glance, like if you're writing a news release, it needs to be it needs to appeal to the humanity and sort of people doing something for a reason. That was like one of the first lessons they told us in journalism. Somebody doing something for a reason. It's always doing. Something has to be happening. So the next example that I picked was a little bit harder. This one was entitled Therapeutic Ultrasound and Low-Level Laser Therapy. If you do it right, you'll get results. In this session, application methodologies and dosages for therapeutic ultrasound and low-level therapy will be discussed in terms of relevant and current research. Correct application and dosage of these modalities can positively impact clinical practice. So I took a couple of swings at this guy. So first one was, I said, in this session, we'll talk about the different ways physical therapists can use ultrasound and lasers to help their clients. So it's close. It's not quite there. It doesn't really touch on the fact that there's new research out there that's going to help you help guide your use of these therapies. So let's try that again. So I added, in this session, we'll talk about how physical therapists can best use ultrasound and lasers in their practice. New research suggests these therapies can be a great help to clients so long as they're used in the right way. So that one was a little harder because there were a couple of other points that needed to be made, but I took out low level because I had to Google what low level laser therapy is. I understand sort of, I think, what it is now, but somebody doesn't need to have that descriptor to understand the point initially. They understand that you're using lasers. They're probably assuming not the ones that cut through glass, and ultrasound, and I understand from reading this that it's not the kind of ultrasound that's like looking at babies. I'm talking a lot about babies because I have one, so that's sort of where my life is right now. Diapers and all that. So I can sort of make an assumption. This is where you make an assumption a little bit about the intelligence of your audience, that they know a little bit about where you're coming from with lasers and ultrasound, so you don't need to go into huge amounts of detail in the first sentence. So I took out therapeutic for ultrasound also, because then I added therapies in the last sentence. And I took out application methodologies and dosages because saying use gets the same point across. So at this point, you might be thinking, this is a little bit going too far in the other direction. I think she's making things a little bit too simple. How are people going to learn about it if I take out all of the science? And yes, can't people use Wikipedia and Google? They can, but it takes a long time. People just want to know and they want to move on. And is this going to make us sound dumb? It's not. Not everyone, as I've said, not everyone is a scientist. And it's true that people can Google laser therapy and DVT prophylaxis and osteoporotic vertebral fractures. But it doesn't mean they're going to understand the explanation. More importantly, it doesn't mean they're going to understand how it relates to your work and what you're doing. So one of the questions that I most often used as a reporter when I was interviewing researchers is explain it to me as if I were 8. 8-year-olds are pretty smart. They like cool things, and they get excited. A lot of them get excited about science. So if you can explain it in a way that, I don't know if you have any 8-year-old children or cousins or what do you call those, nieces and nephews, those little people, you know. But if you think about, trying to explain it to them, you're probably going to come to a place that is engaging to most people. I know it sounds a little silly, but it does force you to think about things in everyday language, but also in a language that's kind of exciting. So like in many other aspects in life, there is such a thing as too much information. It is not a myth. When I was interviewing researchers, and I totally understand this, there is a desire to just take me through every single step. So I started here and I got here and I had to do all of these steps to get to this point. Yes, that's how science works, but you don't need to take your audience through every step. So I think maybe it comes back to the feeling that maybe the information is a safety net. So if you don't explain everything, then the person is not going to completely understand everything that is important about this research. But the problem is, especially when you are talking to media, if you give them all of the information, when I was doing a radio story, I had a minute, sometimes a minute 10, on a really good day, a minute and a half, depended on how much coffee my editor had that day. But a minute is maybe 150 words. It's not a lot. And a lot of times what would happen is sort of the news piece would happen, and then they would have the researcher on the show to help expand what they were talking about. But the news piece is 150 words. So if you can pick the most important points to initially lay out for the reporter, then they're not going to hopefully get it wrong. Sometimes what would happen is if we would be given all of this information, then we would be the ones that had to pick out which ones were the important points, and then the researcher would come back and say, well, no, that wasn't the most important point. So if you lay out for them, what your steps were in a way that's not, 15 pages long, then it's going to help them find the points that they can use. I'm not saying don't explain it to them eventually, because they're going to ask you questions, obviously, but initially, if you break it down for them into the steps that were most important, then that's going to help them get the story right. Yes, so picking 3 main points is also important. So less is more. These are some of the basic rules they teach you in journalism, so now you guys don't have to go back to school and get a journalism degree. You just get it right here before lunch. Most of them apply to daily news writing, but where the point is to get the information across quickly. So first is short sentences, 1 thought per sentence. Don't use a lot of phrases within phrases. So for example, the protein which is found in our food is broken down by the enzymes that are secreted by the stomach lining in order to help us create energy. Or you could just say, your stomach helps turn food into energy. Use active verbs. So a lot of times, this is tough, because in research, when you're talking about it, the research has already been done, so it's in the past. So you need to turn the research into something that's happening now. So instead of saying, the research showed us how yoga helped women with breast cancer manage their pain, it's the experiment is showing us, or the experiment shows us how yoga is helping women with breast cancer manage their pain. because if it's already proven it, then it will still happen. So, just because the women in the study experienced some benefits from yoga, it doesn't mean that more women will not experience it in the future, so you can put it into the future. Also, choose your words carefully. We went over that before. Oh yeah, these are throwaway words. Don't use words like this, because when you take them out, so I have this little pet peeve about a traffic reporter that I hear often, who says that, such and such a street is completely closed to traffic. Well, saying that it's closed to traffic is the same as saying that it's completely closed to traffic. It's either closed or it's not. So that's just a way of me demonstrating that some of these words, they sound powerful. They sound, like when I'm very angry. I'm angry. So they're supposed to be descriptive words, but you can take them out. They instead of using the flowery language and trying to put it in with words like that, you need to show, and I'm going to get to that right now. So the idea is to show, don't tell. That's, one of the golden rules of all writing. But what do I mean by that? So instead of telling me that you've made this breakthrough and this, fabulous discovery, show me that it's revolutionary by explaining the difference it's going to make in someone's life. And to do that, you can use real people. I'm not saying breach confidentiality, but use an example of somebody that you've seen who has benefited from what you're doing, or maybe a client or a patient that you've had whose progress really touched you. Going back to my time that I spent with the kids at the Hugh McMillan Center, I could tell you about how the hot water pool was really helpful for the kids because it helped loosen their joints, and it gave the physiotherapist an opportunity to manipulate their joints in a way that they couldn't have if it hadn't been relaxing in the pool. Or I could tell you about this beautiful little girl whose name was Alison, and that's not the only thing about her that was awesome, but oh my gosh, she was so sprightly. She always had the most beautiful smile on her face, and she was just giggly and just, regular cute little kid. But she moved in ways that looked so painful to me. You could tell that she just wanted to go running. She just wanted to run around and jump and have fun, but she was so stiff that she just couldn't. And, when I looked at her and when I was working with her, I was only, 15, so it's not like I was that far away from childhood, and I kept thinking, how painful would this be to have those desires that every kid has and to not be able to realize them. So when she was in the pool, she relaxed a little bit, and afterwards the difference was incredible. You could see that she had so much more movement, and I understood that was temporary. But to me, just watching her, witnessing that change in the matter of minutes or the hour was all I needed to see that therapy was working for her. That was a long way of telling you that having people in your stories can sometimes be helpful, but it shows that you can pick somebody to help walk the journey with you. So, you can use a person or a story that you've had in your past, like going back to the part about where your research is something that comes from your heart. So you can use these things to prove your claims. You don't need to use flowery, impressive language to back it up. One of the other things that so demonstrate your points and illustrate with using your examples. One of the stories that I remember doing for CBC was about something called kryptonite, which is this surgical glue that a researcher at the University of Calgary came up with, or helped to come up with. These things are rarely done solo. So when you have open heart surgery, or when they have to, open your sternum, putting it back together can be really painful for someone after they wake up. But this, instead of using staples and what do you call those things? Sutures, wires, thank you. This was glue, and they called it kryptonite, and they just glue it back together. So he could have said he could have just told me, I have come up with this revolutionary way to reduce post-surgery infections. Or you could talk to me about how gluing the sternum back together helps ease the pain, it speeds the healing process, it reduces infections, and even just having to think about it. I mean, do I want to have staples and wires in my chest, or do I want it to be glued back together? I mean, just being able to put it into an example that someone can relate to themselves is also really helpful. And, prove it. The best part is you get to be yourself. So remember that cartoon at the beginning about how the guy had been taught how to write boring papers just like the rest of them? Well, this is your chance to have fun. I mean, science is awesome. And the human body is incredible, and you guys get to work with it every day. So you can give it personality. You can give it energy. You are the reason why these advancements are taking place and why research is happening and why people can move more freely again and feel less pain. So there's something about you that made you want to do this, and that's what you can make a part of your story. Maybe something unusual happened to you, or maybe something amusing happened to you along the way. Anecdotes are your friend. You can be human and be yourself. You know, reporters are often most successful when they can quickly grab someone's attention and make it easy for that person to stay engaged. So you can even think about to yourself, you know, what was the last newspaper story I read, or maybe the last report I heard that I really found engaging. We in the journalism profession called those the water cooler talks, the story that everybody was going to talk about at the water cooler. It wasn't necessarily, didn't have to be the one about, you know, kittens and goats becoming best friends, or the little, we call those the kickers, the ones at the end where everybody feels all happy at the end of the newscast, even though the world is falling apart. We always had to boost your spirits at the end. One of the ones that I tried, so I was a business reporter for a little while, which is hilarious because I do not do numbers well. But my job as the business reporter from Calgary was to do a lot of stories about the price of gas. Anytime the price went up at the pumps in Toronto, my editor would call, the price has gone up, do a story about price of gas. Like, supply, demand. Anyway, so one time I thought, okay, you know what, I'm gonna go with it. So I found a driving instructor in High River, which is about a 30 to 40 minute drive from Calgary. And one of her shticks was she teaches you how to drive with fuel efficiency. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to go down there for a lesson then. So what we did is I turned the tape recorder on and I got in the car and she gave me a little driving lesson, and she taught me about how, you know, if you slam on the brake too hard, that's not good for gas use. You have to accelerate slowly. So, you know, no drag races at the green light. And so I do that all the time, right? So, you know, these are basic rules about driving, but they also apply to the use of gas and helps with fuel efficiency. So on the way back, the way that I set it up was that I sort of looked at my fuel gauge driving down to High River, just using my normal everyday driving, and then I also looked at it going back. So I taped myself going back, and I said, you know, I would just every once in a while give commentary onto the tape recorder. And then Aretha Franklin came on the radio singing Respect. So I was like, okay, I gotta do it. And so I started singing Respect, and I put that in my news item, and people still talk to me about that today. So I think that was maybe just an act of desperation, so my editors would be like, okay, maybe no more gas stories. She's done. Let's let her do some medical stories now. Anyway, so the point is that you know, there are ways to tell stories in a way that's completely out of left field, and you still get the same point across. So don't be afraid to jump out of your boundaries and just, you know, think about what is the most exciting thing to you and use that. Don't feel like you can't. Don't feel like it's not the right thing to use. So yes, telling a story, I wasn't really paying attention to my clicky thing. And be passionate. So here's another example. So there's this competition in Australia, you can look at their website, it's pretty cool, called Fresh Science. They ask young researchers to take their published research and translate it into engaging and entertaining reads. And here's how, this is the title of the original publication. That it was actually a conference speech that the researcher gave. So ankle plantar flexor contributions to knee joint loading and anterior cruciate ligament force during single leg landing. I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about, but it was a tough one for me. So I'm sure that there are lots of people out there where if we showed them this, they would just sort of look at us if we had 3 heads. And the question is, who cares? That's what they would ask themselves. They'd look at this and, why are you showing me this? Why do I need to know this? But this researcher, he was working on this, and he became a finalist in the Fresh Science competition. His name, and I'm not going to pronounce it well, Hussein Mokhtarzadeh, I hope. Anyway, he is a mechanical engineer, and he focuses on biomechanics. This is the article that he wrote for Fresh Science. I'll read it to you because it's kind of small. Well, that's the introduction of it. Anyway, what he was doing was he's using mathematical models to figure out which football players are most likely to have knee injuries. And he's doing this for a number of reasons. First of all, when an athlete has a knee injury and they're off the game, they cost the team money. But also it's a problem for their career, because this is what they're doing, this is what the athlete is doing to make money. And it all comes down, he found out, to the strength of the ankle joint. So knowing this, he is now developing exercises to strengthen the muscles around the ankle joint, and he's also hoping to build a brace that's going to help those muscles for people for whom the exercises are not working. So going back to his initial title, you wouldn't have understood, where he's coming from. You understand that what he's trying to do is figure out, how the ankle relates to the knee when you're landing on one foot. But you're not understanding necessarily that he's trying to do this to help teams better choose their athletes, or to help athletes better prepare for their career, so that they aren't on the sidelines for the entire season. And that's exactly what I want you guys to do, is take the science and turn it into something that people can feel and understand and find exciting. And if you can bring it into something that someone can take away, and you think, okay, maybe they're going to talk about this at the dinner table tonight, if people still have dinner time conversations. It's the water cooler talk, it's the dinner table talk. You can make your research, you can make your work into something that somebody who would yesterday have had absolutely no interest in physiotherapy, you can make it the thing that they lie there at night thinking about, wow, that is so cool. Why didn't I do that for a career? Anyway, and that brings me to pretty much the end of my talk, and I hope that I've given you guys some tools and some useful information, but mostly I hope that I'm giving you guys almost a bit of a pep talk, that honestly, I find that what you do, and in my introduction, we were talking about how my interest in medicine. I also wanted to be a doctor when I was a kid, but then I saw my cousin's stitches and I passed out, so I moved on from that too. I'm like the queen of the 20-second careers. Nope, not gonna work. Okay, move on. Anyhow, I'm gonna stop talking now and ask if anybody here has any questions for me.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alison, for such a wonderful and engaging talk, and you definitely kept our attention for greater than the 8 seconds.
Didn't have to dance.
We definitely learned a lot about taking our science down to the plain science to help engage our stakeholders, including not only the media, research, and also certainly engaging our patients. I think the principles that you've shared with us are very, very relevant to what we do every day, and will be very, very helpful for us in strengthening our physiotherapy voice. So we thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. I hope so.
So we do have a few minutes for questions, probably about 1 or 2 questions, if anyone has a question for Alison.
That was amazing.
Oh, cool, thanks.
I'm Diana from Kingston, Ontario.
Hey.
I'm wondering, I look at this and I say, why are we talking about doing this for all these other groups? I'm wondering if you would suggest that that's how we should be writing our titles and our preambles in our scientific publications, journals, newsletters.
Well, yes. So personally, I think yes. Because as someone who is interested in medical science and in things involving the body, I would love to be able to pick up a medical journal and read the article itself instead of just reading the newspaper article or hearing the report. I'd love to be able to read it and understand it in a way that that doesn't involve, Google and Wikipedia. I'm not really sure what, not being in the profession, why it's gotten to the point where there is so much technical language involved in, I understand that you need to explain it, obviously, but I'm not really sure why it can't be explained in this way in those journals. I think that if you were to submit one like this, I would expect the editors would probably be refreshed and be excited to see it as a possibility. And maybe you can tell me why you think that maybe it isn't now.
Well,
that would help me.
We all want to think that nobody else can do what we do. Maybe that's
Right.
it. But
Yeah.
I also think that it's striking that when you get to school as a student, you must learn a new language.
Oh, yeah,
It's
okay.
Greek and it's Latin, and you may never use it
Yeah.
unless you write a scientific article. Right? So it's bizarre, really.
Yeah.
And I would love to go this way.
Well, I would love to see it. Send it to me. Anybody else? Bueller? Anyone?
Okay, well, thank you very much. And Alison, on behalf of the Canadian Physiotherapy Association and all Congress delegates, thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Oh, it was my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was lovely. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. So thank you all for joining us in this morning's presentation. Just a few housekeeping notes before we head out for the day. We encourage everyone to attend one of CPA's new sessions here at Congress. The Auditor's Desk is a clinically relevant session seeking to find new models of care to improve the access of physiotherapy for chronic disease in the community. Come watch the auditors evaluate 3 ideas from delegates. It should be an exciting and innovative presentation. Another new session is 2 minutes, 2 slides, where delegates have a limited time and resource to provide you with a clinical pearl to use with your patients next week. The audience is the judge. Come and cheer them on, but keep them on time. CPA is also conducting a town hall session tomorrow morning after the AGM. This is your opportunity to come and ask any questions you like to the board of directors and the CEO. Find out what is happening in your association. There are still a few spots on this afternoon's bus tour, so if you're interested in attending, please sign up at the registration desk and plan to meet there at 3:15 this afternoon. As well, please make sure to get your exhibit hall ballot into the CPA booth by 1 p.m. for your chance to win some amazing exhibit hall prizes. Thanks, everyone. We would now like to welcome you all to join us in the exhibit hall for some morning snacks and refreshments before our programming gets started at 11 a.m. Alison will also be at the CPA booth, so we encourage you to come by, say hello, and ask any questions you may have. Thank you and have another great day.